BBC London 94.9, it's 10:05.
Call 020 722 42000.
Text 81333. Start your message with the word London.
BBC London 94.9.
If you are over a certain age, if I say the word Saturday night at the London Palladium, you will know exactly what I mean. The smell of the grease paint, the roar of the crowd, the twinkling lights, the dancing girls, Jimmy Tarbuck. What more could you want? You may well, even if you've lived in London all your life, and even if you haven't, have come into London specially to go to pantomime at the London Palladium. I remember as a little girl being taken to Snow White at the London Palladium. It was the very acme of thespian glamour, the London Palladium, one of the greatest adornments to London theatrical life. And now Neil Sean, great friend of this station, great friend of this programme and great personal friend, has come in with his latest book. It's called Live from the London Palladium, the world's most famous theatre, in the words of stars who have played there, which is a fascinating concept. Morning, welcome.
Morning. It's lovely to see you in the flesh, because I wake up with you every morning.
I hope you'll agree there's less of the flesh. What do you think?
Yeah, of course,
am I melting away before your very eyes?
Oh, I wish I was doing the same. When you mentioned the mince pies and turkeys, I thought, why do you have to do that now? Because it starts you off, doesn't it? You know, somebody says, do you want a mince pie? You think, no. Oh, okay then.
You think, well, if not now, when? I mean, this is the moment for the mince pie. It's got to be today, hasn't it, really?
Well, please.
So tell me about the London Palladium. Let's start with you personally. You have performed there.
Yeah, I did it. The first time I ever went on the stage was with the one and only Sammy Davis Jr.
Oh, my gosh.
Because Dad was doing some stuff and he knew people. And Sammy Davis Jr.
Hang on, we can't just wash over this. Dad was doing some stuff.
Well, he's a comedian, right? So he did like summer seasons and stuff like that.
And what's your dad's name?
Alan Scott.
Right.
So he was. I mean, when I say this to people, you know what this is. This game's like, Vanessa.
Yeah.
There's people who don't necessarily become big, but they're the ones on the select bill.
Yes,
you know?
yes.
So we do shows.
So they work all the time. Yeah. Everybody knows who they are, yet there's somehow or other their name is never quite top of the bill.
It's never
it's
top
always
of the
there
bill,
on the
but
bill.
they get work, and I think that's sometimes more important than being right up there.
Yes.
So when me and my brother Mark were kids, we'd get taken around to summer seasons in Blackpool, Yarmouth, and we mixed with everybody from Silla, Mike Yarwood to, you know. But I thought everybody's dad not necessarily did it, because Mum was a singer as well. Yeah. We went back to school, and you'd say to, you know, this is what you're doing in your summer holidays, and you think, well, better shut up here.
Yeah.
You know? So you say, oh, just went to Skegness, you know, and then did that. So basically, Dad was doing some shows in London. Sammy Davis Jr. was at the Palladium, and Dad always said to me, if you can ever make it in showbiz and you've been on that stage, then that's when you know you've made it. You know, when they call
stepping
you
out on the stage of the London Palladium, that's the biggest in this country, isn't it? Yeah.
And so Sammy, I've got this lovely picture of myself with Sammy on the stage. I'm about 8 years old, and not fazed at all. You know, I'm not bothered.
Yes.
Because you kind of think, all right. And by this point, I have to point out that I have been writing to theatre owners, offering to do their entire summer seasons for nothing, and sketching my own bill and saying, well, why aren't you booking me? You know, I mean, I was that confident.
At the age of 8? Yeah, so, why aren't you booking me? Yeah,
Mum got these letters saying, why have you been writing to the manager of the Leeds Grant? Oh, didn't I mention that?
And what would you put in your letter?
I would say things like, I noted that you haven't booked your summer season yet, because I'd read the stage every Thursday. And I could help. I've got 6 weeks off school, so if you fancy booking me.
And what would you have done if they'd said yes?
I don't know. I honestly don't know.
I mean, you're a singer, so you would have performed a Sammy Davis medley or something.
No, I used to do impressions of... I loved Larry Grayson, obviously.
Right, of course.
And I was obsessed with the way that he performed, because then again, Dad always said to me, you know, watch the comics, and what makes you laugh, try and evaluate that, and then put into your own act.
All right, let's just explain. I mean, it's remarkable to me, but there's going to be some people listening who have never heard of Larry Grayson. Yeah. And they won't know what you mean when you say, I loved Larry Grayson, I loved the way he worked. Yeah. So we may have to explain a little bit about that.
Well, Larry Grayson, I suppose, a lot of camp comics like David Walliams, who I think is a genius, and people like Alan Carr, they owe a lot to him.
Yes.
Because what I explain in the book actually is the first time I ever met him, I had a little dance set recorder, and Dad had bought me this for a present, and I used to record interviews with people like you do every day, but mine was just on a cassette. You see.
And
so
you were how old at this point?
I'd be about 7 or 8, but they were so revealing, Vanessa, because when you're a kid, I think adults talk to you and think, well, he'll never do anything with this.
You see, the funny thing is that when I was little, I did the same thing, but I could only interview my sister. I wasn't interviewing Sammy Davis Jr. and whatever. I was just at home in Totteridge interviewing my sister, because she always loves... I don't know, how do you feel about the political situation or something? She was 4.
But
she's like, But that is what I did. I really did love doing that. But you, my gosh, the difference in our access to the great and the good.
Well, I didn't realise they were that great. This is what I mean. It's very strange, you see, when you look back, because Larry, I remember sitting and interviewed him in a TV theatre at Shepherd's Bush, which is the Empire now.
Yeah.
And he told me this great story, which is on the tape, about how when he got the Generation Game, it was between him and Frankie Howard.
Uh-huh.
And Frankie Howard wanted the job, but whatever, the BBC decided it was going to go to Larry Grayson. But apparently Frankie Howard sat there for 6 weeks in the front row trying to put him off.
Oh.
Can you imagine? I mean, it's just incredible when you think about it.
Well, it's a little bit like, in our own time, we will all remember this, Ken Livingstone constantly showing up at City Hall at the very beginning of Boris's reign as mayor. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
He couldn't keep away. Kept going there, and it kept on sitting there through all these meetings. It's like, why are you here? You're not meant to be here anymore.
Well, it's the oldest
just couldn't keep away.
Yeah, but it is. You know, whenever I go and see a show, if there's somebody in it that I think I should be having the part for, I do try and will myself there. You know, because you can't help it in a way. You kind of think, So those.
But let's try and capture though the essence of Larry Grayson's humour, if for people who didn't know. I mean, if you imagine Alan Carr, imagine David Williams in some roles.
A lot funnier though.
But describe. I mean, he had this cast. I mean, this is my on the spot extempore analysis. But he had this cast of kind of imaginary characters, didn't he? He had Slack Alice, for
Everard
example,
the cleaner,
and Everard.
Everybody like that. He had Slack Alice. All of these characters, and everybody thought they were real. And I remember on the tape again, he does this brilliant joke. He said, I opened my door today. He said really early, and there was this banging on the door. He said, "Who's at my door? Who's standing at my door?" He said, "Is it sterilised Stan, the milkman, trying to force his yoghurt through my letterbox?" Well, when you think about that for a kid, at that time, and you're thinking, and you actually went on telly and did this, and people. And
as a kid, did you get the double entendre? Did you realise it was rude? You didn't.
I love the fact that he did things like he'd look around the studio and he'd say, "Look at the muck in here," and shut that door. He'd drag the chair on, and then he'd pick on somebody, like he'd say things like, "Oh, I haven't been well. I told you, didn't I?"
Yeah.
And of course, the woman then would react and the audience would react. So he didn't really, it's hard to say this now, he didn't really have an act. He just talked to you as a friend would talk to you. But it was so funny because of the hypochondria, the friends that he had, all these sort of jokes that he built in. And I thought, wow, I like what he's doing.
And also there was this as you say, camp comic. I mean, in those days, the word gay hadn't really yet quite been coined. Homosexuality had barely been legal among consenting adults for a very short length of time. People thought Liberace just loved his mother a lot and wasn't gay. So there was this whole kind of unspoken, kind of mysterious, sort of a very attractive, yet you weren't quite sure what you were being attracted to, sort of air around a comic who you sort of thought must be gay, but you weren't really sure, and you didn't even use the word gay, and you weren't sure if anybody you'd ever met was actually homosexual in those days. There was all that, wasn't there?
There was all of that.
There was all of that, which made it somehow funnier, but also sort of more. It was compelling in a sort of, you weren't sure what you were responding to, but there was that sort of thing, wasn't there?
I think, and also remember, he perpetuated this myth because he sort of came up with this very good storyline that he may marry Noel Gordon. Do you remember from Crossroads?
He may marry Noel Gordon. Now, people might not remember Crossroads. We've got to try and keep people abreast of this. If you're under the age of 45 or something, we will drag you with us through this conversation, whether you want us to or not. If you're over the age of 45 and you know what we're talking about, please by all means call. You can call with your memories of the London Palladium, 0207 224 2000. You can call if you've ever been on the stage of the London Palladium or in the dressing rooms. If you've cleaned the London Palladium, we'd like to hear about that. Anything about that. But also, Larry Grayson, give us a call. If you hear a name you recognise, call in immediately. 0207 224 2000. Noel Gordon, I mean, let's just set the scene. Was it the longest running soap ever? Was called Crossroads, set in a motel in Birmingham?
Yeah, and what people may remember is Victoria Wood spoofed it with Eric Antiques. Brilliant.
Right.
But Noel Gordon, then again, I met her. Terrifying woman. Absolutely terrifying. She literally was one of these people, Vanessa, that when she walked in the room, it must have been like meeting Bette Davis or Joan Crawford. It was that, even as a kid, they told me when she comes in, you stand up. And
stand up, really.
Just very stand up. Yeah. And I made the mistake of sitting in her chair. You know when somebody says to you when you're very young, "Oh, just take that chair," and you know, that's very kind, very comfy, this chair. And she walked in and she said, "Oh, I normally sit there," and I wanted to say, being a kid, "Oh, maybe you fancy a change," because Northerners were a bit blunt. And then somebody sort of, get up, and then, but she liked me. We did get on, but I always knew there was that thin line. When you work with somebody where you think, if I say the wrong thing, it could go drastically wrong. But she'd worked with everybody and apparently had been, shall we say, friendly.
Yeah. Think of that.
I just got that myself.
So no, I mean, it's quite hard now, I think, and maybe you'll disagree with me, I don't know, but I think it's quite hard now to imagine quite the level of stardom that the stars of those days had, because the whole arena was so much smaller, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, if you counted the number of really famous people, famous showbiz people in this country, of course it would be more than on one hand, but it probably wouldn't be many more than, let's say, 50. I don't know the number, but I mean, if you were famous, like if you were Lulu, or if you were Scylla, or if you were Noel Gordon, or if you were Frankie Howard, or if you were Benny Hill, or
you're right.
You were famous beyond belief, and you didn't have all the sort of concomitant, the TOEI people and the reality TV people and the sort of pop people and the X Factor people, and you didn't have all of that. Plus, newsreaders were stodgy old men mainly. You wouldn't care less where they were going on holiday or what face cream they used. I mean, they weren't sort of celebs, were they?
Well, they didn't reveal anything either, did they?
No.
Nobody. It's funny. I was just reading something out there about a presenter who's revealed about her IBS problem, and I thought, well, that's lovely, first thing. And
yes, I was looking at that as well. Yeah.
Why would you reveal that? You're a pretty girl.
Yeah.
I always think keep medical problems well out of the picture.
Yeah.
But you see, for me, you talk about that. One of the first people I sort of got very friendly with was the great Lena Zavaroni, and she was lovely.
Yes.
And but she had a terrible manager, and we were all doing a summer season up in Bridlington, and we'd all been absconded to do this I'm a Brid Kid promotion. We all had to wear T-shirts and things. And the manager, I remember, me and my brother and this gang of others, and we were all doing this picture for the local paper, and she wasn't allowed to play with anybody. And when I say play, I mean like go to the beach, go to the fun fair. She was always dragged away. But I have a lot to thank Lena for, because I thought she was, she was a few years older than me, but she was so talented. You can't believe how big. And at 9 years old, one opportunity knocks, went on to sort of conquer America.
Yes.
Massively talented. But I had really come from a very tiny village in Scotland, and all this was just too much for her and her family. But the person that was looking after her was just making money. He didn't really care. They shouldn't have looked after a 9-year-old. You know what I mean?
Yes.
That, when you think about it.
Yes.
They didn't like kids. They didn't want to be with them. So we got really friendly. And when she did a Royal Variety Show, she invited us along. And I was just, it was just wonderful. You know what I mean? Just be stood next to her, looking out at that wonderful Matcham auditorium and sort of thinking, how do I get this?
Yes.
But of course, Hughie Green, it's so funny when you look back, Opportunity Knocks was X Factor of the day. And Hughie Green was the most terrifying person to audition for.
Yes.
And of course, when you go on and you say, well, I do these impressions, it was kind of like a next.
So you did actually audition for Hughie Green?
Oh, God, yeah. But I loved him, actually, Hughie Green. But you rightly say, it's not like Simon Cowell now, where they're that accessible. You'd only seen Hughie Green on the telly.
Yes.
So standing like I am near to you now, the sheer nerves, it just came over you. Like, it's Hughie Green, I can't do it. And you just lost all your nerve.
And also, there wasn't the culture that there is now of taking celebrities and stars down a peg.
Oh, no.
So you wouldn't have had pictures of their cellulite. You wouldn't have had pictures of them drunk, falling out of nightclubs. You wouldn't have had, would you?
No.
You wouldn't have had pictures of their plastic surgery scars.
You just knew what you
wouldn't
saw.
know about their irritable bowel syndrome or their nervous breakdown or their drug addiction.
Yeah.
All of that was very much hidden. So all you would see really were pictures in the Sunday Express of, Zaza Gabor arriving at Heathrow
Looking
Airport,
fab.
looking sensational, usually in a magnificent fur coat, fully made up. And all it would say was, Zaza Gabor arrives at Heathrow Airport with
Wasn't
an
it
entourage.
lovely, though?
Well, it was very, very glamorous.
Lovely.
And of course, my heroine in those days, and in fact, she has remained my heroine, and my kind of aesthetic and idea of glamour is entirely bound up in what she looked like then, is Diana Dawes.
Oh, loved her.
Who I thought just absolutely, to me, was the acme of the most glamorous thing anyone could be
and
on
a brilliant
earth.
actress, though,
And
as
a
well.
brilliant actress.
I met her a few times, and towards the end of her career, and she was another one. Incredible, because, when you think she probably now would be what you'd call a reality TV star, because it was the first manager that invented Diana Dawes. He decided to get the big pink Cadillac, the platinum blonde hair, the Marilyn looks and all that. So
should we explain to people who Diana Dawes, or do we think there's some people listening who won't have heard Diana Dawes? You may not have done if you're... let's just check with Gemma. You know who Diana Dawes was? Yes, she does.
Oh,
Mark, do you know who Diana... Have you heard... Really not?
Never
How
heard
old
of
are you these days? How 28? Okay, Diana, let's do who was Diana Dawes. The first thing is you need to look at the Sgt. Pepper Beatles album cover.
Yeah, I forgot
and if
about
you
that,
look at the Peter Blake cover and you see all the icons of the age and beyond, among them is Diana Dawes. And in the picture on the cover, she has got this cascading blonde hair. She's wearing a white mink stole. She's wearing I think it's a gold lame dress, and she looks staggeringly beautiful.
Yeah.
But she was, I mean, you can correct me because obviously you know more about this than me. I can only do my own version of this. But I mean, she was the British version of Marilyn Monroe or Jane Mansfield.
Yeah.
So she was kind of our version. So she didn't quite have what they had, did she? She
I don't know.
She was more homegrown, wasn't she?
Well,
do you think?
Do you know, funnily enough, I met Rod Steiger at the hotel, the Langham across the road a few years ago. He was staying there, and he had famously had an affair with her.
Right.
And he said that she was the most exciting woman he'd ever met. And remember, Rod had been married a few times.
Really?
So I don't think they'd made 2 films together.
I just want to say, I've just got a text from my friend Michael Butcher, and he says, tell that 28-year-old, that's Mark. Mark, listen, this is from Mark. Michael Butcher, my friend, has just texted me on my phone, and it says, tell that 28-year-old that youth is no excuse for ignorance.
Oh.
Oh, it's not his fault he hasn't had of Diana Dawes, is it really?
He's no different to today. You know, when we in our studios, as you know, we get all these pop stars coming in. They come in and you think, and they all have these entourages, and they all think they're vastly important. And you come away and you think, you know, in 10 years' time, it's like the Spice Girls now. When you say to a young 14-year-old, the Spice Girls, they look at you as if who? Yeah. They're not bothered because to them it's something that was 2 decades past.
So let's just focus on Diana Dawes for a minute. So she was born Diana Fluck, wasn't she? Yes. She was created and invented by whom? Who did you say?
Rank sort of film studios invented it. She was
the
in
Rank Film Studios was where? Where was it based? Was it in Elm Street?
Rank was based out at Pinewood and then Shepperton.
Right. So these were British homegrown film studios making their own stars. Yeah. Among them, Joan Collins, right?
Joan Collins, and they appeared in films together along with people like Petula Clark and stuff like that. And they had in Leicester Square this Rank Charm School, which was fabulous because you went there, Vanessa, to learn how to walk, to sit, to move, to hold a cigarette, a glass, everything like that. Yeah. All about daytime activities normally. And what I loved about it was they came out with these stereotype girls, right, who just looked all the same. And Diana was very clever because she thought, well, I need to get ahead faster. So she dyed her hair blonde, made sure she got some really good Rigby and Pella bras, and then, put out what she got. But what she did have against all of that was she could act.
Yes.
You took away the veneer of the blonde bombshell. Yeah. And by the time she'd gone into things like Yield to the Night and all of those great films, even Queenie's Castle in the 70s, which was big on TV, she'd gone from being sex bomb to matriarch, but very cleverly.
But let's just stress something that people under a certain age also won't know, and it's not their fault. Today, anyone can have their hair any colour they like, right? Anyone, if they've got the cash, can get a new pair of teeth. Yeah. Lots of people who haven't got much cash can get a new pair of boobs, right? Hair extensions, 10 a penny, you can clip them in, you can have them welded in. If you've got short, scrubby hair, you can have long cascading hair. If you've got no eyelashes, you get beautiful false eyelashes for not that much money from your local chemist. The whole kind of very made up, very artificial, very Barbie look, which you see lots of people sporting, not just on telly. I mean, you see everyone almost all over the place.
Girls
looking
on the
stunning,
street,
and starting from a very young age, when you get little 6-year-olds being taken to have their nails done at nail parlours. Well, they didn't exist. You couldn't have. I mean, I remember seeing the film Funny Girl. I was 7, and Barbara Streisand had these incredible nails, and I was like, how could you ever grow your nails as long to get your nails? And of course, they weren't real nails. They were paint on acrylic.
How could you do the bath?
Yeah, but exactly. but now all those kind of beauty aids are available to pretty much all of us with a will and a few quid, aren't they?
Yeah.
But in those days, the only women who looked like that, really, were either super, super rich or these charm school girls, these Rank starlets, the women that you'd see on the telly. Yeah. So your mum and your grandma wouldn't look anything like that. Neither would your big sister, really.
Well, they wouldn't dare, though, either. It took a lot of guts, I think, to look like that.
Yeah.
Because, if you think about it, where I came from in Yorkshire, I mean, my mum is a very glamorous lady, and she looked like Marilyn Monroe when she was younger, blonde hair, performer. And she said when she first went to the village where my dad was, it's like an alien had landed.
Well, that's what I'm trying to say.
She wore white gloves, and people were like, what are you wearing gloves for? You off to church?
Yeah, exactly.
They didn't get it.
So that kind of everyday glamour thing that we all feel we need to aspire to the entire time, was... Ordinary people didn't look like that. They didn't have a fur coat. They had a cloth coat. They had it for years. They didn't have dye blonde hair because it made you look no better than you should be. And it was a kind of lots of women thought it wasn't right to wear makeup at all, that it was kind of vulgar and you should go and scrub your face.
You didn't draw attention, did you? I think that's the thing. And I think that's what you're saying about stars, really, because when you met stars like, I don't know, Dickie Henderson, Max Bygraves, you'd seen them on your very small black and white TV. And then you may see them if you went on a summer break and you saw them on summer season, and then you may see them in panto. Yeah. So you saw them them maybe 3-4 times a year.
Yeah.
You were never going to get close to them. So even now, I still get very excited when I meet somebody who I think is super talented, and you come away and think, I met Debbie Reynolds a few years ago, and I'm talking to her, and I'm thinking, this is the woman from Singing in the Rain. I just couldn't quite get over it,
extraordinary.
And you're thinking, you danced with Gene Kelly. Wow, really?
Yeah.
And she's saying to me, your camera's very small. Are you sure this is recording? And of course, I'm thinking she's used these big MGM cameras, and we've trolled in with this tiny little technology, and I'm thinking, oh, yeah, I never thought of that. But she was another one, when she did the Palladium, she told me a very funny story. Her daughter was, of course, a big star in Star Wars. She said the big thing that really annoyed me about her being on the Palladium was she picked this dreadful outfit, and it's so 70s, and the pictures just make her look ridiculous. But I told her, I thought, typical mom.
Carrie Fisher,
never...
but they had a terrible, very difficult mother-daughter relationship. Put those headphones on, if you will. I'm here with Neil Sean, if you're wondering what we're jabbering on about. The book is called Live from the London Palladium. The London Palladium you could virtually see out the window of this building. It's so close to us here. And it's the history of the London Palladium told by the people, the goddesses and the gods, really, who've trodden the boards there. And on the line is Paul in Westram. Hello, Paul, how are you today?
Good morning, Neil, and lovely to see you yesterday.
Morning. It was lovely to see you as part of our lovely listener special yesterday, which was really an extravaganza. Tell us about your memories of the London Palladium, Paul.
Well, I've seen many shows there, and the one thing the two favourite shows I think are, as you know, even when they have a long-running show, they often open it up on Sunday for a live act, like a one-off special or a stand-up comedian or whatever. And I saw Frankie Valli in the Four Seasons well before the Jersey Boys.
Oh, you lucky devil!
I saw them in the 80s, and they just blew me away. But the other thing, of course, as Neil has mentioned, is the star-studded pantomimes they used to have, and get this for a cast list, Neil. 1987, I saw Cannon and Ball, and on the cast you had John Inman and Nicholas Smith from Are You Being Served, Rod Hull-and-Emu, Barbara Windsor, Marty Webb, and Derek Griffiths. I mean, how about that?
Superb. Derek Griffiths was fantastic.
Brilliant, wasn't it?
I was in Panto, by the way, with John Inman. Oh, yes, I was. Did you know that? At Woking in 2001, Woking. Me, John Inman, and Gary, what's his name again?
Wilmot.
Yes,
Wilmot.
Exactly, Wilmot, Gary Wilmot. And Gary Wilmot and I had to wait under the stage because the very first moment of the production was us bursting through a trapdoor onto the stage. I was the genie and he was Aladdin. I was the genie of the ring. And I'd make this sprightly conversation with Gary Wilmot every day under the stage. I'm like, hi, how are you? How'd you sleep last night? What did you have for dinner? Blah, blah, blah. He never said a word. It took me about 6 weeks to realise that I was below him in the kind of pecking order, and you weren't supposed to talk to the principal. I didn't realise that at all. No.
Oh, I'm like you, see. I just talk to anyone. That's the problem.
He'd only talk to John Inman, and John Inman would only talk to him, really.
Oh, wow.
I know. And they had dressing rooms on a different floor.
And
we were
I'm normally right
just
at the top.
we were the lowly foot soldiers, so we weren't really. I wasn't really meant to have addressed him. I just didn't twig it at all.
I've never had that, but I always think with the stars when you're interviewing them as well. I think this is probably why we get so much out of them, because I just kind of think to myself, well, play ball or don't play ball. I'm not really that bothered.
Right.
I mean, you've come to the studio if you don't want to play. The ones that have surprised me are the ones that you come away thinking, I didn't think I'd like you, but wow, what genius, what you are. But I suppose the ones for me are probably the old school. Like, I love Norman Wisdom. I just thought he was a genius, and so really such a nice man, very kind man. Did a lot for me. In fact, he gave me a break of doing interviews at the Langham across the road. He turned up, bought me lunch, and we did pictures.
He bought you lunch. That's unusual.
Yeah,
that is like you were writing a book about the number of cosmic megastars who paid for your lunch. Wouldn't that be a small book, though?
Oh yeah, I mean, he knew I was broke, and he knew that this was a big interview for me. Yeah. And then he rang me later that night and said, "Did I have enough?" Yeah. And then he sent me some pictures, and really that was he just opened so many doors. He really did. And then we became friends, and I'd go to Jersey and see him and stuff like that. And
then he became practically king of Bulgaria, didn't he?
Yeah,
was it Bulgaria?
No.
Was it Romania?
No.
There was a country, Albania.
Yeah. Albania.
They basically had a cult of Norman Wisdom, didn't they?
They love him. Yeah.
Yeah, he'd go there. They'd carry him through the streets in a sedan chair and bow.
He was like a king, actually.
I know that. I'm not kidding.
Believe it. Yeah.
I know. Okay, well, if you're enjoying a conversation about Lena Zavaroni, God rest her soul, about Norman Wisdom, God rest his, about Diana Dork, lots of people quite dead that we're talking about.
Kylie.
Is there anyone alive or not?
Yeah, we've got Kylie, J-Lo, Mariah.
All right, okay. Well, we're coming up for Kylie, J-Lo and Mariah, so don't miss it. If you've been to the London Palladium, if you recall the place, if you want to talk about the stars that you saw there, just give us a call. The book is called Live from the London Palladium. It's by Neil Sean, my guest. It's $9.99, published by Amberley, and we will be back straight after the news headlines. So I'm here with Neil Shaw, his book Live from the London Palladium. If you've never been to the London Palladium and you're listening to BBC London, what can I say? You should have been. It is a great treat. Expensive though these days, very, isn't it? Except
Well, not
maybe
really.
if you go on a Sunday.
No, there are good tickets.
Are
Trust
there?
me, and I would recommend the tour. But I would make sure you learn your own stuff as well, because it's kind of like it tells you a little basic stuff. I think what I love is that Billy Marsh, a favourite agent of the stars,
Yes.
his ashes are buried underneath the stage in a brick.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I mean, I wouldn't mind mine going there. I said to somebody the other day, I wouldn't mind dying on the Palladium. And said, well, you've done it twice. I thought, well, okay, moving on.
This is from Philip. He says, I once saw Noel Gordon in the Rackham's department store in Birmingham when I was about 8 or 9. I begged my mother to get her autograph, and after finding a postcard in the stationery department and trailing her around the store, I eventually plucked up the courage to ask her. She opened her clasp-top handbag and peeled a pre-signed photo of herself off a huge pile of photos in her bag and presented it to me saying, here you go, dear. That was 40 years ago. Happy holidays. Love your show. Thanks for a super year together. Thank you, Philip, very much. I mean, you would never forget that, would you?
Well, a very famous artist who was also at the Palladium, Hilda Baker,
Oh, Hilda
she used
Baker.
to... Hilda Baker was a comedian, very famous for having this sort of act with a woman who stood next to her called Cynthia. And Cynthia never spoke. It was a man. And Matthew Kelly was a Cynthia, for a while.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, Matthew was the final Cynthia, I think.
Right.
And basically, she just talked to it. Like she'd just gossip, and it was so funny. And her catchphrase was, she knows,
She knows,
basically meaning that there was one was stupid. But Hilda, a brilliant woman, brilliant businesswoman, she used to have a car with her name embezzled on the top and the two side doors. She had two flags, so you were under no illusion who you were following on the road. And when she turned up at places, she would measure the level of her bill meter, and if yours was bigger than hers or whatever, she went nuts. But she would charge you for her autograph, saying it was for charity. Of course, it was a bit dubious, Vanessa.
What was the charity?
It's like mine,
I mean, Hilda Baker, if people aren't familiar with her, I mean, she had this particular voice. In a way, I mean, maybe it's sacrilege to say this, but Kenneth Williams, his voice would swoop and soar, and
Very
it would go
much
from
so.
the incredibly genteel to the downright kind of docker rough, and then it go back again through a million different registers. Hilda Baker did that sort of thing with her voice, didn't she?
She was, then again, I met her a few times, a bit frightened of her. She was
I'm sure
monkeys.
she was quite scary.
Well, she had monkeys that lived with her, and they were like
she?
her children, and they were untamed.
Yeah.
So they would literally, they would jump at you. And the people, you'd sit there. I remember sitting there once with Bob Monkhouse, and he battered the monkey quite heavily, and the monkey whacked him back. I mean, it was like when you're a kid, you're thinking, I'm frightened, I want my mum. And she just would, she'd ring you up. She lived in Cleveland near Blackpool, and she'd say things like, I'm putting a couple of chops on the grill. Are you coming up? And you daren't say no because she was frightened.
Yeah.
But a lot of the men who worked with her had extra duties, shall we say?
Well, I'm not surprised to hear that. But I mean, but can you could you possibly do a little bit of the way her voice used to swoop?
Do you know?
Because it would suddenly get very kind of like a rough man, and then it would get very, very sort of, wouldn't it?
Oh, she'd say things like, "Now be soon." I said, "Be soon," and then she'd say like, "She knows, and it was all a bit like that. But the act basically was a rip-off of like, not a rip-off, but a thing of like people being, like when they talk. She had this great thing. She'd say things like, she came out with them. I told her she should pull them up tighter, but she's lost them now, and the audience will be laughing. And then she'd say, I said you should get those mittens on a string. Well, it just gets you, because it's hard, it's very tame humour now, but you've got to remember how shocked people were at that nearly edge stuff. Yeah. And of course, people like the BBC would say, oh, you can't say that, so they literally ban you, or say, you have to change your act. But I just loved, being as a kid, growing up around these things. The one thing I did learn from all of these people, I would say, is don't take life seriously. I've laughed at everything, disasters, and they happen daily, as you can imagine. Yeah. But you just have to think, just cascade over life, because at the end of it, when you're lying there, does anything really matter?
I just want to know whether there's something a little bit poignant, a little bit sort of bittersweet about all of this, because so far you and I have talked warmly and with colossal kind of affection, a certain amount of, your knowledge obviously much, much greater than mine, but I do feel a personal kind of response to this, because they're exactly the people that I used to watch on telly when I was, and funnily enough, I was asked by Radio 2 the other day, the first gig you went to.
Oh, gosh.
And I said, David Bowie's Serious Moonlight Tour in Milton Keynes. But really, the actual truth was, I couldn't tell the truth, but the truth was Frankie Vaughan on the stage at the pier, I think it was in Brighton, Brighton. It could have been Bournemouth. I'm not quite sure which. I was about 5 or 4 with Mike Yarwood.
Oh, I love.
It was a fabulous bill.
Yeah.
I mean, I came to know Frankie Vaughan later, and I mean, I really truly loved him. And he used to write me. Well, not often, but he wrote me some beautiful letters, sort of supportive and charming letters. I mean, I really, really loved him a lot. But that's my first gig.
Yeah. And you're embarrassed, aren't you? Because people go,
people are like, that's not very cool, is it?
No.
But so I don't care. It's the truth.
Yeah.
But is there something a little bit poignant and bittersweet in the fact that we know that lots of people listening, including people working from here right now on the show, haven't ever heard of these people, and they never will? So that means is their memory finishes it all over their legacy?
No, I think it comes round again, because then again, Frankie Vaughan is an interesting story with him. I'd met him very briefly through Dad, because my grandfather played in the orchestra at the North Pier in Blackpool.
Right.
And Frankie Vaughan was starring there in a big summer show. And so Dad had known him, and that's what I mean. There was all these tenuous connections. Not didn't help me in my career at all. They're just things that you knew.
You're not still resentful of that, are you?
But people say, it's all right for you. But no, it didn't really work like that. Dad knew everybody, but we didn't know anybody to get on. Like nobody would say, come and be in my show then or whatever. But I was between jobs, as they say in the business, and I was working in a hotel in Plymouth and not doing particularly well. And I was sort of being a duty manager or something. On Monday I got this call, and they said, there's a man kicking off in the restaurant. You need to go and see him. When you're 18, 19, you don't know what to do with people. I thought, oh, here we go. Yeah. So I minced down to the restaurant. It was breakfast time, and the guy said, "Oh, there's a man over there, and he's complaining because the breakfast is finished." And he turned around, and it was Frankie Vaughan. Uh-huh. And he looked at me and he said, "This isn't good enough." And I said, "Oh, I'm terribly sorry, Mr. Vaughan." And he said, "Oh, you know who I am?" I said, "Of course, everybody knows who you are." And his wife was there.
Stella.
And Stella, yeah. And he told me these wonderful stories about working with Marilyn Monroe in Hollywood.
Yes.
And, the problems she had. And we literally were 2 hours over coffee and toast. People were crying out for their bedrooms clean and everything. I was like, just a minute, And that's how that connected as a friendship then. Because like you, he would then, when he saw me on things, that was really good and do this.
He would drop you a note. I mean, such a nice man.
But always impeccably dressed.
Yes, but if people don't know who Frankie Vaughan was, and they might not, Frankie Vaughan, did he come? Was it Liverpool or Manchester that he came from originally? Liverpool originally.
He was impeccably.
His name was Frankie Abelson. Really, he's from a Jewish family, and he was called Vaughan because his grandma called him in a Middle European accent, "My number Vaughan boy," and that's why he was called Frankie Vaughan. Yeah. And he was handsome, very, very handsome, gorgeous, beautiful looking man, handsome as anything. Happily married to his wife Stella. Lovely kids. I was at school with one of them, Andrew, and he had a wonderful voice, and his greatest hit was "Give Me the Moonlight." Am I right?
Yeah.
He had a whole collection of great hits.
Green
and he
Door,
walked through the Garden of Eden.
And the thing was, he did this big kick on stage, which women went nuts about.
That was the thing. He'd kick his leg really high, one leg. It was sexy as hell. It was really sexy. I don't know why it was so sexy, but it was just sexy. He gave a big kick, and you thought, "Oh my God, sex!" Didn't you? And you hadn't really been thinking that before. You'd been thinking, "Oh, what about defrosting the freezer?" Frankie Vaughan gave a kick, and you thought, "Sex," and then you thought, "Should I be thinking that because this is 1964?" And then you thought, "Hang on, this meant to be the swinging 60s, but actually I'm just defrosting a chicken in Finchley. How can this be happening?" And then you think sex, and then you think core. But the point about Frankie, well, one of the big things, as you quite rightly say, was he was noticed by Hollywood, and he was sent out. He was to Hollywood to make a film with Marilyn Monroe. For God's sake, it was called "Let's Make Love," right?
Yeah.
Let's Make Love.
And she wanted to. And
the story is that she asked Frankie Vaughan to come round to her house in the Hollywood Hills one night to help her go through the script. How about that? And he said no because he loved Stella, and he didn't want to, and he didn't. And then after that, they came home. Back to England.
Well, I think what happened really was, for him, I think he could have done a lot more. It's a shame in a way, because he didn't. I mean, I saw him the last time, I think, in 42nd Street at the Drury Lane.
I saw that.
Brilliant. But I think, with Frankie, he told me this great story that there was another artist called Hetty King, who people may not have heard of, a very old-time musical star. And she said to him, "If you wear a dinner suit all the time and a top hat, you're going to look good. You're a gorgeous-looking bloke. Never, ever look other than impeccable."
Yes, never look casual, that's right.
And so he always looked like that. And he said, if somebody tells you some advice when you're starting out, don't always dismiss it, because it can be something that can capulate you into something that you think, oh, okay, that might work.
It was his signature. It was his hallmark look. It was very elegant, very debonair.
I've had advice. It's not to get off,
but they used to live around the corner from us in Totteridge in London, North 20, and my mum would be at Fred Blackwell, the greengrocer, buying a banana or a bunch of apples or something, and there would be Stella also buying some apples, Mrs. Vaughan, and my mother would just think, Marilyn Monroe called, and he didn't go.
Well, women, you see,
for love of
women
Stella,
think
that's a
like
true
that.
love story, isn't it?
Yeah, but women, you see, it's interesting you say that. Women think that, because it's kind of like, I suppose, a bloke would go...
Hyde Park Synagogue, would he please have permission to sing the hymn? And he got permission.
Yeah.
And he sang the hymn, and it was absolutely marvellous. And I just remember the story of it. I remember it being written about in the papers and how fabulous it all was and how damned exciting it all was, because it was.
But they were, this is what we go back to. It's like stars were exciting because, we've just recently done this thing, as you know, with Strictly. And when you look at Strictly, you kind of look at these people and they're all very young who are winning.
Yeah.
I mean, I love Caroline Flack. I think she's a lovely girl. But you kind of think, wow, they get it a lot quicker. Because if that was in that generation, what we've just written about, you probably wouldn't get to that point to be on primetime TV every Saturday night, glammed up to the nines. I mean, you did it. And I remember when I met you on the red carpet and you came down on the opening thing, you look petrified. You look beautiful.
I was petrified because I knew I couldn't really dance.
But you did do it. And,
but I have learned since. I mean, I can.
And you look at that and you think, but when you think that's a major primetime show, and in those days, as you said earlier on, you had people like Lulu, Scylla, they'd all have their primetime shows with their guests. Yeah. Now you can get to that point a lot quicker, but it also goes a lot faster because you look at the people, say, well, you were on with in that year, and you think, well, what happened to so-and-so?
But you also see, though, don't you, how and why the talent bookers book as they do. Yeah. Because when it's a Big Brother or when it's a Strictly or when it's a I'm a Celebrity, you think, well, who's that? I don't know who that is, and who's that? Why are they there? Do you find that
when you go in, though? Do you ever think, I don't know who these people
often
are?
Who's that? But that's because they don't want it to be you and me talking about people that anyone under 40 has never heard of because they're dead, do they? So they've got to move it along. It can't be, everyone can't be, Esther Ranson and Gloria Hunniford and it's got to be, they've got to shunt it along somehow.
But kids are out. But this is always my argument, when you watch any TV programme and they aim it at the what they call the youth aren't watching, because when I was young, I didn't watch Cilla Black in Blind Date. I was getting ready to go out.
I used to watch while getting ready to go out.
Yeah, you know what I mean? It's all of those things, isn't it? You think, well, I'm not really interested. I found, even at that point, her to be too old for me. Yeah. Now I can appreciate what she is and what she did. But at that point, and so I always think TV gets it wrong, and that's why when you look, when they put something like Morecambe and Wise on, or a Mike and Bernie Winters show, they've just repeated a fabulous thing this morning on 4 Extra about from Blackpool Night Out from 63, and it had Tony Melody, Ronnie Hilton, Morecambe and Wise, all these great names, and you think, wow, that was a great show.
Just tell people about Mike and Bernie Winters, because they're very London, and
well, Mike Winters,
I'm going to mention Schnorbits, obviously.
Oh yeah. Well, Mike actually came to the studio to do his very final TV interview with us. We've got an hour with him. Yeah. Nobody's interested in it, which is shocking when you think we pitched it to TV. Nobody cared, and so I went to the Jewish Museum. Yeah. They didn't care either. I don't know.
I care.
Yeah, I mean, do you know what? He was the loveliest man.
Anyone who wants to phone about Mike and Bernie Winters, 0207 224 2000, just say who they were. Brothers.
Well, they were brothers who were basically a straight man.
A straight man and a comic.
Bernie was the comic, and Mike could play the clarinet and was very good looking. Bernie was good looking too, actually, but he was good looking in a sort of goofy,
humorous way. Looked a bit like Bernard Breslau in the Carry On film.
He was lovely, and he was such a kind, gentle, sort of warm man. They both were. And when Mike turned up to the studio in Westminster, I informed everybody that when he comes in, like the security, I said, look, give him the respect that he's 78 at this point. I said, do say his name and make sure you make a bit of conversation with him, because this guy was one of the biggest stars ever. Absolutely. And so Felix, our security man, said had a chat with him, and he was lovely. And Mike, when we got in the lift, said, it's so nice that people remember. I don't mind setting that up because they deserve that respect.
Yes, it's polite.
He was lovely. He was just so lovely, and he told us some wonderful stories. He said a great story about when they were at the Palladium, him and Bernie, and they'd done a Royal Variety, and Bernie got slightly drunk because every time somebody finished an act, they came in and out of the drink, you know. And by the time the Queen came up, he was literally sliding down the side of the proscenium arch, and he said to the woman, the Queen, he said, do you like football? And what? And and she didn't know what it was. She just smiled, and then he said, we're here in Panto, pointing to a poster at the corner. He said, if you want, I can get you tickets. Bring the kids. He said, Mike said he was just dying. Lou Grade was passing out with fear. Everybody was like, oh no, and but apparently the Queen just smiled, as she does, and said, oh lovely, walked on. And I said, did you think you were never going to get booked again? And he said, no, actually, that was the thing that we got.
The Queen enjoyed it anyway. At least it was natural.
Yeah, natural.
I remember sitting next to him in traffic in the Finchley Road. He was in the Rolls Royce, Bernie Winters, and I'm looking out the window and I go, look.
Because Rolls Royces, you didn't see them that often either, did you?
Well, no, of course not.
We sound like we're in medieval times.
I know. What's happened to us? This is terrible. I always feel I must have been born in 1782. It was only 1962, but it does seem like an awfully long time ago, doesn't it? Okay, let's just talk about the biggest Hollywood celebrity that you've talked to for this book, or that you've tapped into?
Well, quite a lot. Mickey Rooney came to the Palladium in '48. He wasn't a success.
He wasn't. Why not?
No, because he didn't really work at it. He didn't understand what we wanted.
Right.
People. This is just pre-Judy Garland and stuff. So he went, did his act, and nobody got in. Also, Dean Martin. I interviewed his son, and Martin and Lewis weren't successful. Jerry Lewis and Dean Martin, they weren't successful. For me, I think the ones that
they just didn't get the British humour, or they didn't understand what we want. What didn't they understand?
Remember, they all went to see. Your mum and dad probably went to the pictures, and they saw these wonderful stars, like with Paramount Films and MGM. So when they came over, they thought it was just enough, almost, to come on and. We're here.
Yeah.
What more do you want? We're from Hollywood, lovers. And so they didn't really work it. Now, where Judy Garland was different was that she was very, very difficult to work with, but she also had this warm charm, and she kind of tripped up over her own dress on the opening night, fell on her backside.
Isn't that funny? Because when I interviewed Liza Minnelli, her daughter, on The Big Breakfast, when she was going to be aboard the bed with me, she also tripped over on the way to the thing.
Oh, really?
Yeah, honestly. And it was one of these, oops, let's pretend that hasn't happened kind of things. I won't mention it, you won't mention it. Let's hope the camera was somehow pointing at the ceiling. It was one of those things. How funny.
Yeah.
Gosh.
And there was, Judy just knew what to do with it. So once she'd been, people like Danny Kaye were very successful. Oh, I never really got Danny Kaye, I never met him, but I never really got him. So the people like that, the ones, I think that probably the stands out, the old catalyst of it was, I was going through the cassettes, as I say, and I'd interviewed Ava Gardner many, many years ago. She lived in a flat in Belgravia that Frank Sinatra paid for her. And she was talking to me about, Sammy, Dean and Frank at the Palladium and all these sorts of stuff. And you can't imagine just how beautiful Ava Gardner was.
Yeah.
She was far bigger than anybody else. And you sat in her lounge, she's in a tracksuit, she can't put trainers on because her feet have swollen up. And she's an old woman to me, I'm very young, and I'm thinking, really, world's most beautiful woman? I don't think so.
Yeah.
And, but when she was talking, she sort of told all these wonderful stories about what they did, Night of 100 Stars with Laurence Olivier, Tony Curtis. Then again, interviewed Tony Curtis many times, got lots of footage, nobody's interested. Yet, when you sat down with Tony Curtis and he told you these wonderful stories, and you can't believe...
Do you think it's possible people listening might not know who Tony Curtis was?
Well, Spartacus, it's always on every Christmas.
Spartacus, you must have seen that. The
and some like it,
obviously.
Hortons, Persuaders and everything like that. But he was devastatingly beautiful.
So
when he was
handsome,
younger.
yes.
And still good looking at the
and
end.
Also funny. I mean, he's good at being funny, wasn't he?
He knew that he pulled his image apart. But what was wonderful, I must tell you a quick story of this. Last time we interviewed him was in Harrods, and it was in the restaurant. It was all closed and everything. And at the end he said, I'd like to give you one of my paintings. He was an artist.
Yeah.
And I thought, fabulous. I thought, when he goes, this could be worth something, like we do. And so I'm going out the door and there's this big beep. And I thought, it's just left the barcode on. And he said, oh, no, you've got to pay for it. I said, I thought you'd give me it. And he said, no, you've got to pay. It's only 25,000. You can imagine, honestly.
Yeah.
I just sort of crept back in with this and said, I could come and pick it up on Tuesday. I thought, I can't say I can't afford this. I don't want to buy it. But I thought, how sly. Yeah. Very clever to make me think it was something that I wanted. But people were buying his work for 30,000, 40,000. He was a very clever artist. Lovely man. His daughter, Jamie Lee's lovely too. She's very helpful to me in some of the stuff we've done. But I couldn't, then again, probably like you, I'm sitting looking at him and I'm thinking, this is the man that embraced Marilyn Monroe in Some Like It Hot. Look at those fingers. Wow. You know what I mean? Because you just get a bit lost in it. I don't know if the average... And I don't mean this rudely, but the average person who doesn't get showbiz might not get what you mean.
But are there people who don't get showbiz, or is everyone caught up by at least some part of showbiz? It may not be the English variety stage. It may not be Mike and Bernie Winters, but people will, won't they?
I know people who are completely switched off by it. I mean, I've worked with people who say things like, I'm not interested in celebrity. They actually, I'm sure people come up to you and say this. I know what you do. I don't like it because I don't like celebrity. Oh, really? And you know what I mean?
So I say, people tell me you're famous. And I say, after all these years, I now say, if you haven't heard of me, I'm not famous. Have a lovely day and walk away. So I'm not going to start giving them my CV and explaining what it is I'm supposed to do. Why on earth should I? What about the close association with the London Palladium and Brucey, Sir Bruce Forsyth? I mean, that's a kind of love-loving relationship, isn't it? Or not?
Then again, Bruce is very lucky because the original presenter of Sunday Nights at the London Palladium was Tommy Trinder, who I also met. And Tommy Trinder...
And his catchphrase was?
You lucky people. And he was brilliant because he knew the power of PR, He would take billboards just all around London, and he would just put Tommy Trinder, You Lucky People, and that would stick into your brain, and you think, oh, he must be famous.
Yeah.
But Tommy got removed, shall we say, by Val Parnell, and Bruce, who was working in a small...
Do we know why, or you're not allowed to say?
He was a little bit difficult. Tommy thought he was the big star, and he was. He'd done more successive seasons at the Palladium.
He wore a trilby?
Wore a trilby,
Yes.
And he was a bit like Cockney Geezer. Whether you'd actually get it now, I don't... He's probably like one of the characters now more from the Fast Show. He was a bit like that. I mean, I've worked with people who say things like, oh, I'm not interested in celebrity. They actually, I'm sure people come up to you and say this. I know what you do. I don't like it because I don't like celebrity. Oh, really? And you know what I mean?
People say, people tell me you're famous. And I say, after all these years, I now say, if you haven't heard of me, I'm not famous. Have a lovely day and walk away. So I'm not going to start giving them my CV and explaining what it is I'm supposed to do. Why on earth should I? What about the close association with the London Palladium and Brucey, Sir Bruce Forsyth? I mean, that's a kind of loving relationship, isn't it? Or not?
Then again, Bruce is very lucky because the original presenter of Sunday Nights at the London Palladium was Tommy Trinder, who I also met. And Tommy Trinder...
And his catchphrase was?
You lucky people. And he was brilliant because he knew the power of PR, He would take billboards just all around London, and he would just put Tommy Trinder, You Lucky People, and that would stick into your brain, and you think, oh, he must be famous.
Yeah.
But Tommy got removed, shall we say, by Val Parnell, and Bruce, who was working in a small...
Do we know why, or you're not allowed to say?
He was a little bit difficult. Tommy thought he was the big star, and he was. He'd done more successive seasons at the Palladium.
He wore a trilby?
Wore a trilby,
yes.
And he was a bit like Cockney Geezer. Whether you'd actually get it now, I don't... He's probably like one of the characters now more from the Fast Show. He was a bit like that, you go down that route with him. Very funny man, actually. But Bruce got the job. Never really been on TV before. This was in the 50s, late 50s. And they gave him a break. Bruce admits he got the job because he was cheap. I mean, Tommy would be, quite expensive.
Sometimes it's the best thing to be,
Sometimes the best thing to be.
Yeah.
He made it his own.
Yeah.
What a lot of people don't know about Bruce, which was one of the biggest failings of his career, but I thought one of the best things he ever did. He left the show to go and star in a thing called Little Me, a big musical at the Prince of Wales, and it bombed. He got ill and it all went wrong. But there is a cast album, and if you really want to connect to Bruce, bring that up. Because even today, he's still quite passionate about it.
What does he say about it? What's he passionate about?
Basically, I mean, he did get pneumonia, and that kind of put him out. And by the time he got well, it tailed off. Yeah. But it's a brilliant show. And even today, when you meet him, he can be a bit tetchy, but at 80-odd, I don't care, you know. But he's an ultimate showman to me. He can do everything. And then again, I remember he was appearing at Batley Variety Club in a lean period in the 70s. And Dad was the opening comedian there. And I went along to see him. And he totally destroyed this local TV reporter who came along to interview him. He was so funny, but the reporter was too young to get it.
Aww.
And when it went out, everybody was laughing at the reporter because Bruce was just clever enough to, rip into him.
And which have been the shows, the productions at the Palladium that have been the sort of memorable, standout?
I suppose really all the big, as you say, the pantomimes were known. Big things like Tommy Steele's pantomimes.
Oh,
it
gosh.
was wonderful.
Gosh, Tommy Steele. I mean, do people know?
Oh, yeah. Well, Tommy Steele was our first British rock and roll star. Rock with the Cavemen, all that sort of stuff.
Little White Ball?
Yeah, Little White Ball and Flashbang Wallop and all of that,
God.
Now that'd be a book by Jordan, I think. But the thing is, I think Tommy, then again, we interviewed him in the Palladium, and I've met him a few times since. A little bit reserved, a bit shy, actually. But, I mean, what a... if you want to watch somebody on the Palladium stage, he was on in Scrooge a couple of years back. That's how you watch somebody fill the stage, and he always thanks the Palladium at the end of the performance.
Does he?
He says, "Thank you so much, the London Palladium," and he gets off. When I did my show earlier this year, I have to tell you, I was so nervous because everybody had done this. Tell
us what the show was called and what it was about.
Basically, it was like we showed clips and stuff from the book. Interviews that had never been seen. I sang. We did some comedy. We did a game show, and everything that I learned, I wanted to put into that show.
Yeah.
We had a fabulous afternoon. It was, just wonderful. But when you go out there and you're standing in those wings, I can't begin to... It's nature's laxative. It really is. It's just so nerve-wracking. Yeah. But when you're on, it's like being at Hackney Empire or something like that. They're not as far back, these stages, these theatres. They're very high, but they're not that far back. And in the end, I thought, wow, everything I wanted to do, so it was a big thank you to my granddad, Philip, and my grandparents.
Was your granddad in showbiz as well?
Oh, he was a professional pianist, and my other grandparents, May and Con, were also singers and performers performers, they were in concert parties, then they went into, professional things.
So growing up, was that really your only career option? I mean, there was no way you were going to be an accountant with all that going on, were you?
Well, I did say to Dad, I remember sort of saying, "Whoa, so Mum and Dad, when it was about 7, I said, well, I don't really need to go to school now. I've learned how to read. Like you do. I think, I wouldn't mind working in the box office." And they look despairingly, you know what I mean? Like, what do you want to do that for? But no, I mean, my brother is a very successful presenter. He's also a successful record producer and songwriter and stuff. So I think we're all rounded. But I never, this career, you can't say it's a career for life because the public decide when they've had enough.
Sure.
It's that.
Don't look at me when you say that.
No,
please.
no,
I'm looking away. I'm looking away. I'm hoping radio extends the years just a little bit. Neil, it's been absolutely delightful. Thank you so much for coming. The book is called Live from the London Palladium by my guest Neil Sean, the world's most famous theatre in the words of stars who've played there. It's $9.99. It's published by Amberley. It's been lovely seeing